In the 9th year of King Xerxes' reign, ruler of the Persian Empire, master of lands stretching from the Aegean Sea to the frontiers of India, a royal girl named Amydas turned 13. Inside the women's quarters of the palace at Persepolis, her birthday was marked with silk dyed in the rarest Tyrian purple, gold bands at her wrists and ankles, and braids lined with pearls from the Persian Gulf. She was a princess, daughter of the so-called King of Kings, adorned with the symbols of imperial power, but Amydas was not celebrating. She sat on embroidered cushions, hands trembling in her lap, while her mother, one of Xerxes' lesser wives, applied makeup with hands that could not stop shaking. Her face bore the expression common to palace women who had seen too much: blank, trained neutrality, kohl around the eyes, rouge on cheeks, perfume so strong it made the girl nauseous. The ritual had the feel of preparation, not for a celebration, but for a sacrifice. When the preparations were done, her mother whispered a few words, not with love, but with dread. "Tonight your father will summon you. You will go to him. You will do what he requires. You will not speak unless he speaks first. You will not resist. You will show gratitude." Amydas was confused. Not entirely, but enough. She was 13, still a child in every real way, except the only one that mattered in that palace. Her body. She had seen the older girls leave and not return the same. She had heard the whispers. But she was the king's daughter. Surely that meant she was different. She was not. When the eunuch arrived, the same man who had once brought her sweets during New Year festivals, he no longer looked at her with kindness, only calculation. "The king calls for his daughter," he said coldly. "She will come alone." Her mother could not meet her eyes, could not offer comfort, could only sit still as her daughter was led out of the room toward the chambers of a man who was both her father and her master. What happened in those chambers was never spoken of. Not by Amydas, not by her mother, not by the palace. But from that night forward, Amydas and every daughter of Xerxes who reached a certain age ceased being a child and became something else. Not a woman, not a wife, a possession. To understand what happened to Amydas and others like her, we must first understand the man called Xerxes and the Persian system that gave him godlike authority over every subject, including his own family. Xerxes was born in 518 BCE, son of Darius the Great and Atossa, the daughter of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the empire. He came from divine bloodlines on both sides. His claim to the throne was not just political, it was spiritual, but divine bloodlines came with dangerous ideas. In the Persian worldview of that time, royal blood was sacred. Mixing it with common blood diluted its power, so the solution, they believed, was to keep it pure. That meant siblings marrying siblings, or even fathers using daughters as breeding vessels. The Persians weren't alone in this. The Egyptians had similar customs. But Xerxes took it further, more openly, more systematically. While earlier kings might have indulged in such behavior behind closed doors, Xerxes turned it into a routine. Daughters of the king were raised with every luxury, the finest clothes, rarest foods, the best tutors. But when they reached puberty, they were taken from the women's quarters and brought to the king's bed. Some were called once, and never again. Others repeatedly, over months or years. Their status meant nothing. They were not protected. They were selected. This was not a scandal. It was not a secret. It was palace procedure. Greek historians like Herodotus wrote of these practices with horror. But within Persia they were accepted, even rationalized through religion. Zoroastrian doctrine had been twisted to justify it. By claiming that divine blood must not be diluted, the royal family convinced itself and its supporters that incest was not just acceptable, but necessary, and Xerxes believed it, or at least pretended to. When his daughters reached the age he found desirable, often 12, sometimes younger, they were summoned to chambers already used by dozens of concubines, slaves, and captured women. Their age, status, or blood meant nothing. They were bodies. But the most shocking part was not that Xerxes used his daughters for his pleasure. It was how he weaponized them as tools of political control during his military campaign into Greece, the most ambitious invasion of the ancient world. Xerxes took with him a traveling harem. Among the women were several of his royal daughters. Why bring them into war zones? Because they were more than daughters. They were currency. Xerxes used them as rewards. When a general achieved victory or proved loyalty, he might be honored with the hand of a princess. In truth, it was a transaction. The man received status. The king gained loyalty. The daughter lost everything. She would be handed to a man 2 or 3 times her age, sometimes pregnant by her own father, sometimes barely old enough to bleed. One such case was a princess named Amestris. At 12, she was impregnated by Xerxes, then married off to Artabanus, the commander of the royal bodyguard. The king never told Artabanus the truth. The man was forced to raise a child that was his wife's half-brother and the king's son. Why? Because Xerxes wanted leverage, political insurance. Betrayal became harder when the king was your wife's father and your son's grandfather. The cruelty was meticulous. After the failed Greek invasion, Xerxes returned to Persia. His empire was still powerful, but his pride was shattered. And when powerful men lose wars, they often look for ways to reassert control somewhere else. So he turned inward. And he turned violent. He tightened his grip on the court. His daughters were summoned more frequently. Those who hadn't yet reached puberty were watched carefully, as if ripeness was a deadline. The palace became a prison for royal women, not just daughters, but also sisters, wives, and concubines. They were spied on, traded, used, and when they tried to build secret alliances, networks of support among other women, the system crushed them. Letters were intercepted. Children were taken. Conversations were monitored. One by one, even the survivors lost their minds. Amidas, the girl from the beginning, lived long enough to marry a noble general named Megabyzus. She bore him children, managed his estate, played the role of loyal wife, but she never forgot what her father had done to her. When she tried to form quiet alliances with other palace women, her communications were blocked, her movements restricted. Her children were taken to the palace and raised by eunuchs, and slowly Amidas withered. She stopped eating, stopped smiling, stopped speaking. She died at 33. Her death was labeled an illness. But it was a slow execution, carried out by silence, isolation, and memory. She was buried without ceremony, her name barely recorded, her children discouraged from mourning, because in that palace feelings were dangerous. Memory was rebellion. Xerxes ruled until 465 BCE, when he was assassinated in his bedchamber by the same Artabanus, whose life he had once manipulated with the marriage of a pregnant child. Chaos followed. His sons fought for power, and his daughters paid the price. Some were executed, some were exiled, some were forced to betray their own husbands to prove loyalty to the new king. The system that had used them didn't end with their father's death. It continued under their brothers. The same patterns, the same pain, the same silence. And this is the true legacy of Xerxes, not just his temples or his military campaigns, but the human wreckage he left behind. Dozens of daughters, all used, all broken, all forgotten. Today, the ruins of Persepolis still stand in modern Iran. Tourists walk through stone columns and admire the carvings of kings and warriors, but no statue honors the girls who were summoned in silence. No plaque names the daughters who were taken. Their stories survive in fragments, whispered in scrolls, buried in footnotes, dismissed as ancient customs, but they were real, and what was done to them was not divine, it was monstrous.